the Festival of Fears. The Galactic Council had organized cultural exchanges before, but nothing quite like this. When humanity joined the interstellar community, they brought with them an unusual request. They wanted to host a Festival of Fears. Ambassador Kale stood in the Grand Assembly Hall of the Nexus Station, watching as confused aliens filed in. The Vryloks, with their crystalline bodies that shimmered like living diamonds, chittered nervously. The Morgothi, towering beings of pure energy contained in environmental suits, pulsed with curious violet light. Even the ancient Thelians, who had seen 1,000 species rise and fall, seemed puzzled by the invitation. Ladies, gentlemen, and honored beings of all configurations, Kale began, his voice carrying across the hall. Thank you for accepting our invitation. Tonight we're going to share something deeply human with you. We're going to show you our monsters. A ripple of confusion spread through the crowd. Monsters? Humanity had no predators left on their world. They'd conquered disease, tamed their planet, and even befriended their AIs. What monsters could they possibly have? The lights dimmed. On the massive holographic display, an image appeared. A castle on a hill, lightning splitting the sky and shambling toward the viewer, a creature stitched together from corpses, electricity crackling across its gray-green skin. This, Kale said softly, is what we call Frankenstein's monster. We imagined it 300 years before we left our solar system. The Vrylok's ambassador, Shira, raised a crystalline appendage. Ambassador Kale, I don't understand. This creature never existed, correct? Correct. Then why create it in your minds? Kale smiled. That's exactly what we're here to explain. The nature of human darkness. The next morning, the real exhibition began. Kale had transformed an entire wing of the station into a gallery of human nightmares. Each section was dedicated to a different category of horror that humanity had invented over millennia. In the first chamber, the delegates encountered vampires. The hologram showed a pale figure with extended fangs, eyes glowing red in the darkness, moving with predatory grace. Theron, the Thelian observer whose species had existed for over 10 million years, studied the display with ancient eyes. These beings drink blood, yes? We have encountered parasitic species. Why does this frighten humans? Dr. Mira Chin, the cultural anthropologist accompanying Kale, stepped forward. Because vampires aren't just about blood drinking. They represent our fear of losing our humanity, of becoming predators to our own kind. Vampires were once human, you see. They represent the darkness inside us, the monster we could become. Fascinating, Theron murmured. You feared yourselves. We still do, Mira replied quietly. They moved to the next exhibit, Ghosts and Spirits. The Morgothi ambassador, Zephyros, whose species existed partially in multiple dimensions, found this particularly interesting. These are deceased individuals who remain? Zephyros's translated voice crackled through the speakers. In our imagination, yes, Kale explained. We created ghosts because we couldn't accept that death was the end. We feared it, so we populated the darkness with spirits of the dead. Some vengeful, some lost, some trying to communicate. Your species created an afterlife populated by the tormented? Shira's crystalline form pulsed with what her translator identified as dismay. Why not imagine peace? Oh, we did that too, Mira said with a slight smile. We called that heaven. But the scary part, the part that kept us awake at night, was thinking about what happened when something went wrong. When someone died angry or with unfinished business or violently. We imagined them trapped between worlds. The gallery continued. Werewolves, representing the beast within civilized humans. Zombies, the fear of death that walks and consumes. Demons, the personification of evil itself. Witches, the terror of the unknown and the misunderstood. Each monster had its own section, its own carefully curated explanation. The question that changed everything. It was Novik, a young Vrylok scientist, who asked the question that shifted the entire conversation. They had just finished touring the section on cosmic horror, those incomprehensible entities from beyond space and time that humanity had dreamed up in their darker fiction. Massive tentacled beings, non-Euclidean geometries that hurt to perceive, gods so alien that merely knowing they existed could shatter a mind. Ambassador Kale, Novik's voice chimed like wine through crystal caves, I must ask something that troubles me. Your species created all of these terrors in your imagination. You gave form to evil, shape to dread, substance to suffering. But why? What evolutionary purpose could this possibly serve? The room fell silent. It was the question they'd all been thinking. Kale looked at Mira, who nodded. This was the moment they'd been building toward. That, Kale said, is the most important question you could ask. And the answer is going to surprise you. Humanity created monsters to survive them. He gestured and the displays changed. Now, beside each monster, statistics appeared. Human psychological development, survival rates, innovation indexes, cultural resilience metrics. Every human child grows up with monsters, Mira explained, taking over. We tell them stories of things in the dark. We let them dress up as creatures of nightmare. We created entire holidays around fear itself. And do you know what happened? Your children became traumatized? Shira guessed. No, Mira said firmly. Our children became brave. She pulled up a holographic display showing human history. When we imagined vampires, we learned to recognize predatory behavior in our own kind. When we told stories of zombies, we learned to plan for catastrophic scenarios. When we dreamed of demons, we learned to name our psychological struggles and fight them. Every monster we created taught us something about survival. Theron's ancient voice resonated through the chamber. You used fear as a teaching tool. Exactly, Kale confirmed. But more than that. We used imagination as a weapon against the unknown. Think about it. Before we reached the stars, we had no idea what was out there. So we imagined the worst things possible. We prepared ourselves mentally for horrors that didn't exist. So that nothing could catch you unprepared, Zephyros finished, understanding dawning in their energy field. Precisely. The practical applications of terror. The next session took place in a different setting. Kale had arranged for a demonstration in one of the station's simulation chambers. The galactic delegates gathered, curious and somewhat apprehensive after the previous day's revelations. Today, Kale announced, we're going to show you how our nightmares made us better survivors. We need volunteers. After some hesitation, 3 delegates stepped forward. Novik the Vrylock scientist, a Morgothi junior diplomat named Solera, and a Thelian military observer called Vex. We're going to run a simple scenario, Mira explained. You'll be presented with an emergency situation. Just respond naturally. The simulation began. The volunteers found themselves in a virtual spaceship. Alarms blared. Red lights flashed. A voice announced, hull breach detected. Unknown organism on board. All personnel, this is not a drill. The 3 delegates immediately attempted to access the ship's computer, calling for help, trying to identify the organism through proper channels. All reasonable, rational responses. Then the lights went out. In the darkness, something moved. Heavy breathing echoed through the corridors. The temperature dropped. A shadow, massive and inhuman, appeared at the end of the hallway. The volunteers froze, their species equivalent of panic setting in. Novik's crystalline structure began to fracture from stress. Solera's energy field fluctuated wildly. Even Vex, the military observer, seemed unable to process the situation. Simulation pause, Kale called. The lights returned. The volunteers looked shaken. Now, Kale said gently, let's run it again. But this time with a human. Lieutenant Jax Rivera, a young officer from Earth's Exploration Corps, entered the simulation. The scenario reset. Same alarms, same situation, same creature in the dark. But Jax's response was entirely different. The moment the lights went out, she moved to put her back against a wall. She controlled her breathing. When the creature appeared, she didn't freeze. Instead, she began immediately looking for weapons, escape routes, and places to hide. She didn't wait for the computer to identify the threat. She assumed it was dangerous and acted accordingly. When the creature rushed toward her, Jax did something that shocked everyone watching. She charged at it, screaming, using surprise as a weapon. The simulation ended with her driving a makeshift weapon into the creature's vulnerable point, having identified it in seconds. How? Novik's voice was barely a whisper. How did she know what to do? Jax stepped out of the simulation, breathing hard but grinning. I've seen this movie. The confusion among the delegates was palpable. She means, Mira clarified, that humans have imagined this exact scenario thousands of times in our entertainment. We call them horror movies. Stories designed specifically to put humans in terrifying situations and watch how they solve them. Jax has mentally rehearsed fighting unknown creatures in the dark since she was a child. We play games about it, Jax added. Video games where you're trapped in stations with monsters. We read books about it. We tell stories around campfires. By the time I joined the Exploration Corps, I had already survived hundreds of these scenarios in fiction. Vex, the Thelian military observer, spoke up, his ancient voice thoughtful. You trained your entire population for crisis scenarios through entertainment? Not intentionally at first, Kale admitted. But yes, that's effectively what happened. Horror made us better at survival. It taught us to stay calm in terrifying situations, to think creatively under pressure, to assume the worst and plan for it. The Museum of Collective Nightmares. The festival's centerpiece was what humanity called the Museum of Collective Nightmares. Unlike the previous exhibits, this one wasn't about individual monsters. It was about scenarios, situations that entire human cultures had feared together. The first room depicted a plague scenario. A recreation of human cities empty and silent, bodies in the streets, the infrastructure of civilization crumbling. This is based on several real plagues from our history, Mira explained to the group, which had grown as word spread throughout the station. But it's also from our fiction. We wrote hundreds of stories about plague wiping out civilization. Books, movies, games. We imagined it over and over. Why relive such trauma? Celera asked, her energy field pulsing with confusion. Because it taught us, Kale replied. Every plague story taught us something new about infection control, about social organization during crisis, about the importance of science and cooperation. When a real pandemic hit Earth in the early 21st century, humans had already mentally prepared for it through decades of fiction. We knew to social distance, to wear masks, to develop vaccines quickly. The fiction helped us survive the reality. The next room showed something that made several delegates recoil. Invasion scenarios. Hostile forces attacking Earth from space, from underground, from the oceans. The displays showed everything from tentacled aliens to robotic armies to extra-dimensional entities. You imagined other species as monsters? Shira's translator crackled with what might have been offense. Yes, Kale said simply. We didn't know who else was out here. So we imagined every possibility. Some benevolent, yes. But also many hostile. We prepared for first contact to go wrong. Theron studied a display showing a human city under attack from flying saucers. This is why your species developed such formidable weaponry before even leaving your planet. You were preparing for interstellar war. We were preparing for anything, Mira corrected. Hope for the best, prepare for the worst. It's a very human philosophy. The museum continued with scenarios of artificial intelligence uprising, ecological collapse, nuclear war, asteroid impacts, and time paradoxes. Each one a nightmare that humanity had collectively dreamed, examined, and survived in fiction before it could threaten them in reality. The final room, however, was different. It showed something none of the delegates expected: humans as the monsters. Stories of humans becoming tyrannical. Humans creating oppressive regimes. Humans destroying their own world. Humans experimenting on each other. Humans losing their empathy and becoming cruel. This, Kale said softly, is perhaps our darkest fear. Not that monsters exist out there, but that we could become monsters ourselves. We wrote countless stories warning ourselves about this. Reminding ourselves that the capacity for evil exists in every human heart. You made yourselves the villain of your own nightmares? Novik asked. Yes. Because we needed to remember that the most dangerous monster is the one that looks like us, thinks like us, but has abandoned compassion. These stories kept us honest. They reminded us to question authority, to protect the vulnerable, to never stop asking if we were doing the right thing. The night the monsters arrived. The festival was nearly over when the emergency alarm sounded. Kale was in his quarters when his communicator exploded with urgent messages. Something had emerged from a wormhole near the station. Something massive. Something that wasn't responding to hails. By the time he reached the command center, chaos reigned. The station sensors showed a vessel, if it could be called that, unlike anything in the galactic databases. It was organic, twisted, wrong in ways that hurt to look at. Parts of it seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. It's attacking the outer platforms, Commander Solis reported, her hands flying over the controls. Weapons aren't effective. It's absorbing our energy attacks and, she stopped, face pale. Sir, it's releasing something. Pods. They're heading for the station. Throughout the Nexus station, panic spread. The Vrylox delegates were freezing in fear, their crystalline structures resonating with stress frequencies. The Morgothi were flickering wildly, unable to maintain cohesion. Even the ancient Thelians seemed paralyzed, their vast databases offering no reference for what they were facing. Kale grabbed his communicator. All human personnel, code Nightmare. I repeat, code Nightmare. It was Mira who had suggested the emergency protocol, half joking at the time. If humanity's one unique advantage was their preparation for things that didn't exist, then they needed a protocol for when the impossible showed up. Within minutes, every human on the station was in motion. Lieutenant Jax Rivera found herself in Corridor 7 when the first pod breached the hull. Something emerged from it, and her mind refused to properly process what she was seeing. It was like the cosmic horror exhibits from the festival, but real. Writhing appendages, geometries that shouldn't exist, a presence that made her thoughts feel sticky and wrong. But Jax had spent her childhood reading about such things. She'd watched movies where characters faced the incomprehensible. She'd played games where sanity was a resource to be managed. So instead of freezing, she did what those stories taught her. She didn't look directly at it, she trusted her peripheral vision, and she ran while pulling the fire alarm. Not to alert people to fire, but because in every horror scenario, loud noises and bright lights disrupted the monsters. It worked. The creature recoiled from the strobing lights and alarm. Throughout the station, humans were applying lessons from their nightmares. They sealed corridors like they'd seen in zombie films. They avoided looking directly at the creatures like they'd learned from basilisk legends. They worked in groups, kept lights on, maintained communication, and refused to split up. When the creatures seemed to feed on electronic systems, engineer Marcus Osei remembered every story about fighting things that absorbed energy. He started shutting down power grid by grid, starving the entities of what they needed. When the beings seemed to affect people's minds, Dr. Sarah Kim recalled every tale of mental invasion she'd ever read. She developed a simple cognitive resistance technique on the spot, teaching it through the station's speakers. Focus on a specific memory, repeat it like a mantra, don't let your thoughts wander. What we learned from the dark. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it ended, the creatures had been either driven back or contained. The mysterious vessel had retreated into the wormhole, which collapsed behind it. The station was damaged but intact. And miraculously, thanks to human intervention and quick thinking, casualties were minimal. In the aftermath, the galactic delegates gathered in what remained of the festival hall. They looked at the human survivors with new understanding. Theron spoke first, his ancient voice heavy with respect. We have existed for 10 million years. We have encountered thousands of species. We have seen empires rise and fall. But we have never seen anything like what happened today. The creatures were unknown to all of us, Zephyros added, their energy field stable for the first time in hours. Our databases had no reference. Our protocols failed. We should have been helpless. But you weren't, Shira's crystalline form chimed. The humans acted while we froze. They fought things that shouldn't exist using tactics that shouldn't work. How? Kale, exhausted and injured but still standing, looked at the assembled delegates. Because we'd already fought those things. Not in reality but in here. He tapped his head. We'd imagined them, feared them, defeated them in our minds 1,000 times. Mira limped forward, her arm in a sling. Every species prepares for threats they know. You build defenses against invasion, develop medicine for known diseases, plan for disasters you've experienced. That's logical. That's rational. But humans? Jax continued, standing with the other human survivors. We prepare for threats that don't exist. We practice for impossible scenarios. We train ourselves to stay calm when facing the unknowable. Our nightmares made us ready for anything. Novik's voice was quiet, awed. You weaponized your imagination. You turned fear into a tool for survival. More than that, Kale said. We learned to find courage in the dark. Every scary story has a hero who faces the monster. Every nightmare has someone who survives it. We told ourselves over and over that humans can overcome anything if we're brave enough and clever enough. Commander Solis brought up a holographic display showing the station's response during the crisis. The data was clear. While other species had frozen, scattered, or defaulted to standard protocols that didn't work, humans had improvised, adapted, and innovated in real time. The Galactic Council needs to understand something. Kale addressed the room formally now. What happened today will happen again. The universe is vast. There are things out there we haven't met yet, can't predict, might not be able to comprehend. When that day comes, you'll need people who are already prepared for the impossible. You're saying the galaxy needs humanity's nightmares? Theron stated. No, Mira corrected. We're saying the galaxy needs people who've learned to survive their nightmares. The monsters we imagined made us the neighbors you need when real monsters arrive. Silence fell over the hall. Then, slowly, the delegates began to understand. You would teach us? Shira asked. How to imagine threats. How to prepare for the unknown. We can try, Kale said. But it's not easy. It means confronting your fears. It means populating your imagination with terrible things. It means teaching your children that the dark might contain monsters so they learn to be brave. Zephyros pulsed thoughtfully. It means becoming a little bit like humans. It means, Vex, the Thelian military observer rumbled, becoming more likely to survive. I will recommend to the Thelian Council that we begin implementing human-style crisis imagination training. One by one the other delegates agreed. The Festival of Fears would become a permanent institution. Horror, that uniquely human art form, would spread to the stars. Not to frighten but to prepare. Not to traumatize but to strengthen. As the meeting concluded and delegates dispersed to begin the long process of rebuilding and learning, Kale stood at the observation window looking out at the stars. Mira joined him. Think they'll really learn to see monsters everywhere like we do? Maybe, Kale replied. Or maybe they'll find their own way to prepare for the unknown. Either way, the galaxy is going to be better prepared for next time. Because humans shared their nightmares. Because humans shared their survival strategy, Kale corrected. The nightmares were just the training simulation. The real lesson is what comes after. You face the monster, you survive, and you tell the story so others can survive too. Outside the window, rescue ships moved through the debris, lights blinking in the darkness. Somewhere in that vast universe, other unknown things waited. Other impossible entities lurked in the spaces between stars. Other nightmares would eventually emerge. But now the galaxy had learned humanity's secret. The monsters they imagined became the neighbors they needed. And when the next cosmic horror arrived from beyond the void, it would find not a universe of unprepared civilizations, but a galaxy that had learned to stare into the dark and imagine what stared back. Because that's what humanity had taught them. That's what the monsters had prepared them for. The neighbors had shared their nightmares. And in doing so they'd given the stars a fighting chance.